DuckTales, the 2017 version, episode 23, season finale, titled The Shadow War, begins with our boys continuing to load up Donald's boat as they are moving back in with him after the events of last episode. With the reveal that Scrooge had built a ship that ended up causing the boys to lose their mother, the boys are on the outs with Scrooge completely and utterly. And though Webby does her best to try to bring the boys around, they're not having any of it and refuse to believe that Scrooge was thinking of anyone other than himself. Donald does his best in order to, perk up the boys' spirits, but it's very much a failed attempt. And even Dewey, who's usually up to mischief whenever he's not seen, is simply just sitting down being quiet. Meanwhile, Magica the Spell, who has taken over Lena's corporeal form, is ready to take Scrooge's number one dime to enact her plan using the Lunar Eclipse. We have this brief moment where Magica kind of seeps out of Lena as Lena tries to take back control of her body, which is very much nightmare fuel in and of itself. However, Magica regains control since because of the lunar eclipse's power, her power grows as well. And she has this potion that will leave Scrooge prone and vulnerable, allowing her to snatch his number one dime. A brief little monologue by Launchpad shows that he's here to try to cheer up Scrooge since the kids are no longer living there, which gives Magica a bit of pause since the only way Lena was able to get in was because of the kids. But with a well-placed lie, Magica is able to make her way in, only to really find that Scrooge has become very much decrepit, enabled, and just become basically a loser. Meanwhile, the kids start to throw away a lot of the artifacts that they've gained over their adventures with Scrooge, proceeding to throw it into the bay. Donald suggests that they will be moving to Cape Suzette, which, as this picture that has the sea duck on it, is the place where Tailspin takes place. A nice little nod once again, although the biggest nod from that came with the appearance of Don Carnage. Webby and Launchpad form a plan in order to get Scrooge and the boys together so that they can hopefully make up. Meanwhile, Magica proceeds to kind of overlook Scrooge and believes that his very downward spiraling appearance is mainly just a charade, and he's on to something not being right in Denmark, as it were. So there's that as well. Meanwhile, Webby slips a note under the boys' door, telling them that there will be a bit of a luncheon, kind of goodbye luncheon, just for the boys to say their final farewells. Meanwhile, Launchpad proceeds to call Scrooge up in order to get him to come to the little shindig, saying that it'll be on Donald's boat. He agrees, but this is in fact Magica the Spell, disguising her voice as Scrooge, which I think is a very awesome little bit of intrigue, that Magic is so good at just disguising her voice, but that might be another result of her power growing. She then tries to serve Scrooge some tea with the potion that will weaken him. However, Scrooge proceeds to just place it off to the side and just kind of starts shuffling through all the empty pizza boxes around the house. He finds the boy's secret stash and then proceeds to kind of reminisce about the boys finding the marbles he gave them in episode 1. He also starts to kind of fall in even deeper into a depression because the boys had come to impact his life so much. And, he keeps dodging Lena's attempts to give him more tea, ultimately spilling it after knocking over some pizza boxes. Meanwhile, the dinner starts to get underway, and Beakley even shows up with some fruit salad or whatever that is. Um, he proceeds to try to stall. Webby tries to stall the boys as much as possible until Scrooge arrives. However, Beakley kind of pulls her and Launchpad off to the side, calling them out on the situation. Lena, however, or Magica, pours the potion into a sippy cup this time around in order to keep Scrooge from spilling it, which he does anyway. She then slaps some sense into Scrooge, saying, "You're Scrooge McDuck. Adventuring was a thing even before the boys were around." And then Scrooge proceeds to try to start over, burning a lot of his signature clothes. However, when Lena tries to get him to dispose of his number one dime, he just won't do it. It has too much value, especially considering that it was one of the only gifts his father was ever able to give to him. Lena attacks Scrooge, and Scrooge tries to go on the offensive but holds back since ultimately it's a little girl. He's overpowered by Lena, only for her shadow to rise up into the dime and reform Magica Dispel. She has finally been unleashed after 15 years of captivity. She greets Scrooge in a very delightful manner, and though I will miss her shadow form, I have to take this moment to say the animation, especially on Lena and Magica, is fantastic in this episode and all around, but just the amount of movements per frame, there's no blockiness or stiffness to the way they move. So much of it is just fluid and just well done that I just have to point that out. Watch this for yourself because the movement is beautiful and to die for, and Magica Dispel very much just as much. I am expecting to see a lot of fan art for her in the near future. Although when I first saw this, I questioned the fact that she looks like Plucky Duck's gothic aunt, which is explained later on in the episode. So she imprisons Scrooge and Lena. Meanwhile, Beakley goes on to tell more of the story to Huey, Dewey, and Louie about their mother Della over the fact that Scrooge did in fact try to send people out to look for her, and in fact he ended up spending almost his entire fortune, threatening bankruptcy for 10 solid years. Meanwhile, Scrooge kind of berates Lena, saying that she's a traitor, but Lena says that Magica is family, and, there was no other way around it. Scrooge starts to say that family is nothing but trouble, but Lena says that considering who her aunt is, she would love to have Scrooge's troubles. Scrooge says that once they get out of this, he will make Lena an official part of the family. Magica, however, overhears this and begins to gloat into Scrooge's face, and then takes in Lena into her shadow this time around and imprisons Scrooge in his number one dime, the same as was done to her. Yes, Magica had been sealed in Scrooge's number one dime this entire time. Back with the boys, Huey and Louie are brought around by Miss Beakley's talk about, what Scrooge actually went through. However, Dewey, who had been wrapped up in the situation before, is very much not having it, saying that they're still moving to Cape Suzette and that's the end of it. However, Donald starts to try to bring Dewey around because, for too long he's felt that the family has been apart, and Mrs. Beakley's talk of, not alienating family that you've just managed to find over family that you've managed to lose makes no sense, and they should do their best to be a family once again. And this speech brings over Dewey finally. However, this is only just in time for them to see the rise of Magica Dispel, who proceeds to summon people's shadows to her side. Even Fenton Crackshell Cabrera's shadow is summoned as well, who ends up being able to take the Gizmo Duck suit. She then proceeds to destroy Scrooge's money bin and build a throne out of his gold. Webby tells the story of Magica the Spell over the fact that for centuries now, she has had a rivalry with Clan McDuck, and after an event 15 years ago, Scrooge managed to seal her in his number one dime. They're also met up with Gyro Gearloose, Manny, and Little Bulb, whose lab was destroyed with the destruction of the money bin and the release of their shadows. Donald tries to give a invigorating speech, but nobody can understand a word he's saying. Thus, Gizmo, Gyro, forces something down Donald's throat that allows him to talk normally in the voice of Don Cheadle, of all people. And he delivers this amazing speech to get everyone pumped up, saying, "Ducks don't back down." And that's apparently their family motto that we're hearing for the very first time. So it's absolutely amazing, and I just, having Don Cheadle in here of all things is just fantastic. And hey, it's friggin' having Gyro Duck and Don Cheadle gives me serious War Machine vibes if you're trying to figure out who exactly Don Cheadle is. He ends up leaving the boys the kids at the pier in order to keep them safe, naturally with them deciding to go off and find Lena to help them break into the money bin. Meanwhile, Magica is kind of pacified for the moment as she wants to take this time in order to just gloat basically over the fact that she's more or less won. There's no real reason for her not to think that she's won the day and she's won one over on Scrooge, and there's nothing anyone else can do about it. Meanwhile, the kids managed to find a secret hatch at the theater where normally Lena hangs around, and they discover her room underneath the pier. They end up finding her journal, which details a poem that talks about Magica's assault on Scrooge to finally get one over on Clan McDuck. Scrooge manages to use her curse and reverse it onto her and absorb her into her number one dime. Magica, in her last minutes, managed to have her shadow take hold of the amulet, and this shadow took a physical form. This physical form was in fact Lena, revealing that Lena was never a real person all this time, and she was merely the shadow of Magica the Spell. This shocks Webby to a great degree and makes her start to think that the situation between her and Lena was never real to begin with, not knowing that Lena had cared for her more than anyone would ever really know. They also end up discovering Magica's plan, where it shows that the Lunar Eclipse freed her from the number one dime, and her revenge was to seal in Scrooge into it. With the forces of land, sea, and air approaching the money bin to free Scrooge, Magica manages to fend them off, while the kids make their way into Gyro's undersea lab that is now completely wrecked. Launchpad tries repeatedly to ram into the money bin, but is deflected at every turn by the shadows. Magica managed to capture Gyro, thinking that it was one of Scrooge's nephews, but throws him away as soon as she realizes it is not the case. Donald goes swimming out after the boat stalls in order to, get closer in and save Scrooge, while Mrs. Beakley fends off the boat from the shadow onslaught. The kids make their way into the, Scrooge's office, only to be accosted by shadows. They take out the lights and are guided by Webby's infrared goggles. They make their way up, only to find Donald clashing with several shadows. Donald sends the kids off to try to get the dime as best they can while he fights off the shadows in the meantime. The kids come face to face with Magica Dispel, while Donald comes face to face with the the Gizmo Duck armor. Meanwhile, Fenton goes into battle alongside Manny and Little Bulb. Meanwhile, unfortunately, Mrs. Beakley ends up not being able to save Donald's boat, and it yet again sinks, even after being repaired. Meanwhile, Launchpad is unfortunately captured by the shadowy mass above the money bin. The kids do their best in order to throw Magica off the most they can, with Huey asking her a variety of questions about how magic works and so on and so forth, with his inquisitive nature. Louie, however, after Magica tries to shoot down Huey, ends up breaking a mirror that Louie ends up trying to con her into thinking is a magical artifact, and even with her magical knowledge, she starts to believe, leaving an opening for Webby to kick her right in the ribs. Webby starts to do her best to attack Magica, and this is not just fury for what she did to Scrooge, but it's fury over the fact that, she had taken away someone who was her best friend, someone very close to Webby this entire time, and she had basically, made a friendship that apparently didn't exist. Magica regains the number one dime after it was bumped out of her hand, and this increases her power, allowing her to, overpower the kids, and she begins to threaten them, mocking Webby over her fake friendship, as she says, with Lena. She tries to blast the kids, but Webby's friendship bracelet, much like we saw in the episode with the money bin shark, since it was infused with a magical power, it ends up being able to defend Webby from Magica's onslaught. And the bits of this magical power infuse itself into Magica's shadow, unleashing Lena once again, who tries to get the upper hand over Magica, but she is blasted and she seems to fade out of existence. This sends Webby into a rage, and she starts going furiously at Magica, which knocks the number one dime loose yet again, that Louie takes and runs off with. Louie then takes a little bit of time to try to apologize to Scrooge, and saying that, while I may have lost a mother, you also lost a family member as well. Magica finds Louie and unleashes her magic, but as is pretty much the way with things, as she tries to fire upon Dewey holds up Scrooge's number one dime. This reflects the attack, unleashing Scrooge McDuck as a result of it. Scrooge clashes with Magica, thanking her, because if not for the situation, he never would have been able to, make amends with his family. He manages to shake the staff of Magica out of her hands, and it ends up cracking on Donald's forehead, causing the magic within her to be dispelled, as it were, unleashed from within her body. And this causes all the shadows to disperse as well. Because of this, Magica regains her original white feathery appearance, and she no longer is able to unleash magic as easily as she was before. She is yet again a normal duck. The Launchpad also ends up falling out of the sky onto Magica because the shadows were keeping him and the plane aloft. Magica then takes this time to try to run away, doing her best impression of a ninja with a smoke bomb, but you see her crawling away off to the side. They don't really go after her, mainly because she is now powerless, and they just want to take some time to, get back together with family. Ultimately, Webby laments the loss of Lena, but the boys say Lena will always be there in her heart, especially since, even towards the end, she tried to fight for her friends. We then see the shadow of Webby turn into Lena momentarily, showing that the good that was in Lena still exists out there. The kids then proceed to hug Scrooge, and unfortunately, Donald coughs up Gyro's voice modulator, giving us our last time with Don Cheadle. Ultimately, Scrooge and the kids go swimming in the money bin in order to have a little bit of fun. Meanwhile, we cut to the moon, where we find bits of a rocket strewn across, with a TV displaying that the gang in front of the money bin, saying that yet again Duckburg has been saved by Scrooge McDuck and his family. We come to find out that this person is Della Duck, now with much longer hair, having been trapped on the moon for 10 whole years. How nobody knew she was on the moon is anyone's guess, especially if Scrooge put as much money as he says into trying to find her. And we have the first speaking line of Della as she says boys, and we find out she is voiced by Paget Brewster, who, if anyone knows anything about her work, knows that she is a repeated voice actor, and her most prominent roles have been in Community. So anyone who's a fan of that show will know her very prominently. And that is the season finale. We've heard reports that Paget Brewster will have a reoccurring role in season 2, so I am looking forward to finding out about that. I kind of I still find it odd that all this time nobody really knew about her whereabouts, especially if she was just on the moon, but ultimately it makes sense for the spear of Selene, considering that Selene is the goddess of the moon. So, even there's like a dramatic irony. And, it kind of serves Della right to a certain degree, as I still am of the opinion that her situation was her fault for being so impetuous. I'm glad that Magica wasn't ultimately sealed away, as I want her to be a reoccurring villain, much like the original 87 series. So it's good to see that Magica the Spell will still be reappearing, and oh man, I better see some fan art of Magica, because she was lovely, absolutely gorgeous. I also have to wonder how Lena will come back into play. Lena was based off of a niece of Magica, I believe in the Polish comics, who was very much not very prominent or known, so they can do pretty much anything with Lena, and I'm glad they tried to expand Lena's character. It also is worth noting that the whole idea of having Lena be her shadow comes from the fact that, Magica's niece in the comic books was basically a clone of Magica, like a mini-me. So I feel like that's a tongue-in-cheek nod as to Lena's kind of original point of reference. But man, this was a fun and fascinating episode, a 2-part episode at that. It felt like a movie almost. Like, it makes me want to go back and kind of watch the original movie where Magic had taken over and Scrooge's family had fallen into disrepair. Like, I had seen that movie so many times that I just love the character of Magica, and I'm so interested of seeing her back. She was a fun and fascinating villain, and ultimately a hero is only as good as their villain, and Magica did a fantastic job. But it leaves me wondering, who the villain of season 2 will be. It's already been announced. It's already you know, it's already in production, and I'm ready to see that at some point. But, that's all. That's it from me. Let me stop talking. Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think about the season finale of DuckTales? What did you feel about the season as a whole? Who do you think will return in the next season? And, are you happy to finally know where Della Duck has been this entire time? But leave me a like if you liked what I had to say about this episode, or a dislike if you didn't, and subscribe for more DuckTales. I can't wait for the next season.